Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Hello, Seattle. Rain. I saw some rain out there. First time since I've ever come here. Ah, what a time and what a time it is. For me, this has been a magnificent time. The last year has been just filled with miracles and spectacular. I think it's not just for me. I think it's for the whole planet. We're beginning to see the evidence of a kind of consciousness that is present here today, being manifested in the physical world in changes that a lot of us couldn't even have fathomed just a short time ago. I was teaching at the Berlin Free University in 1974 and stood at that checkpoint Charlie, watched as we went back and forth between East and West Berlin, and they brought the dogs on and sniffed our luggage and snarled in our faces, and that wall was supposedly built to last a 1,000 years. And one day a year ago, last October, we read in the paper, it's gone. It's just gone. Yeah. Spectacular. We've become almost blasé about those kinds of headlines, and yet they are evidence of a growing consciousness that is really, really exciting. When I was in Berlin, I went down to Prague and visited some of the institutes there, and there was a man in prison for writing the plays about the dignity of man and the importance of keeping the dignity of man over the values and wishes of the state. He had been doing hard labor for 9 of the previous 11 years. Today, that same man is the elected president of that country, of Czechoslovakia, Václav Havel. Hard to imagine the changes and how quickly they are taking place, and always keep in mind that those changes come about. The state of the world is nothing more than a reflection of our state of mind. So too is the state of our own individual worlds, a reflection of our state of mind. Hence the title of my talk, You'll See It When You Believe It, not the other way around. Thank you. Just a few years ago, we were looking at television programs of them putting a man in prison in Poland for organizing the Solidarity movement, Lech Walesa, today president of Poland. Ceausescu, the man who was dictator of the worst kind of dimensions in Romania, gone. The Saddam Husseins, the Ortegas, the dictators, the Noriegas, the people who would abuse the rights of individuals are systematically being eliminated across the planet. Unfortunately, we haven't figured out exactly how to do that without resorting to their own tactics, but we're getting there. And on the other side of the one song, I use the word one song to refer to universe, one verse, song. One song is what it is. Over at Tiananmen Square last June, a year ago last June, 1 million students in the most repressive place on our planet willing to face tanks just in the name of freedom. And on the other side of the one song, a man who's spent 27 months in prison, or 27 years in prison, not even being allowed to be photographed, is released suddenly. And when I was in Europe last May, Nelson Mandela was over there visiting, and he had a press conference and announced that he didn't know if he would have time in his schedule to meet with the Queen and the Prime Minister of England. Things are changing. And they're changing in a positive way. For me, the changes have been swift and magnificent. In the past year, I turned 50, which may not be a problem for you, but and it wasn't a problem when my older brothers all did that, and even my mother, but this is me, all right? Strange thing happens when you turn 50. A year later, you turn 51, which happened to me last week. Doesn't stop there for something. And we also gave birth to our seventh child. Yeah, that's a miracle beyond explanations. A determined soul is going to get here, regardless of a few condoms and a diaphragm and things like that. I guarantee you that. Seven children, 50 years old, and 5 of them are under 8. See, for some of you, this may look like a bald head, but it's really a solar panel for a sex machine. Just want you to... I've been out in the sun a lot in the last few years. I'll tell you, if there's anything that grounds me and keeps me humble and keeps me right down where I belong and never believing all those great clippings and wonderful introductions that Louise gave me, is my being a father of 7 children, especially a teenager. I have a 14-year-old daughter, which I refer to clinically as the age of demonic possession. She's a great test for all that I believe in. There's a genetic problem there with my 14-year-old and all of her friends, is that they assume a stance. This foot goes out this way, this one kind of goes out this way, this hip goes out this way, and this one goes up and down a lot, and the eyes roll, and there's a lot of this. You know? You've probably seen that. It's great. It really is great. My Stephanie is really terrific. I follow her around for material wherever I go. I say, come on, say something dumb. I know you're going. They said, will you get out of here with that? No. I was speaking in my hometown in Florida, and, well, my adopted hometown, where I've been the last 15 years, and there were a couple thousand people who had paid to come and hear me speak that evening, and I asked Steph if she would like to come over and hear me that night. I said, would you like to come on over and hear me speak that night? And she assumed the stance. She looked at me and she said, why? I don't get it. Like, defend your life right here. You know, what's your... But she's great. The rest of my children, I have, well, out of the 7, I have 6 girls. And a little boy who is 3, but he thinks he's a girl, so it's really 7. With my dress. We have to have a talk. Let's sit down. We got play baseball, and I'm on with my dress. You know, he's already starting. It's already makes me. But the greatest thing that Stephanie ever said in her life, which I love to share, is when we went, my wife and I went down to Australia to do a speaking tour with Og Mandino, and we toured 5 Australian cities a year ago, February. And it was during that trip in Brisbane that the miracle of our 7th child showed up in form. She'd been hovering around us a lot in non-form, and it was indeed only my wife and I wrote her a beautiful poem about the bringing this child into the world, because it truly was a unbelievable miracle, her presence among us. And today, she is such a shining light and such a beautiful, beautiful little soul and brings so much happiness and joy and fulfillment to not just me and my wife, but all of our family and everyone she comes in contact with. But we had a problem when we came home. I was sure that that there was no possibility of my wife being pregnant again, with all of those precautions. And the most sophisticated of all, the philosophy of pull out and pray. You know that one. I know I shouldn't say that in a spiritual crowd, but please God, please God. And when we got home, my wife started telling me she was feeling a little funny, and I said, no, this is not possible. This just, no. But then we went to Denny's for breakfast, and she ordered spaghetti 3 mornings in a row. I headed over to Walgreens and was walking down that aisle that I get hives walking down, where they have the EPTs, the early pregnancy tests, and bought a dozen, just, one of them could blue, one could, and sure enough, we found out that we were having another child. And when we got used to the idea, it was really pretty terrific. And but we still had to tell Stephanie. Which is a lot tougher than raising a child for 18 years. I mean, that I was prepared to do, but telling Stephanie was... Well, we got her, called her down one morning, and in my courageous way, I said to my wife, you tell her, yeah. She said, we're going to have another baby. Oh! That's great. I said, well, we've thought about it, and it really is great. We can afford it, and you should be really happy we didn't have your attitude when we found out about you 15 years ago. She said, but how do you think it feels? I said, well, maybe you can share that with us and tell us. How does it feel? She said, how do you think it feels to be the only kid in junior high school who has parents who like to do it? Well, that's my sissy, and she is great. She truly, truly is great, as are all our beautiful children. I have, in the last several months, in the last year, been working on a project that is exquisite and fulfilling to me. I had lunch today with Deepak, who you heard this morning, and we are going to put together a program together, a tape series. It's an interesting notion that he has come from a different part of the world. Grew up in a country so far away, in India. At about the same time, he's born 7 years after I was, and studied in medicine and the sciences and the great Ayurvedic traditions and all the ancient spiritual masters. And I grew up in Detroit. Dodging cars, living in an orphanage, and didn't have the same kinds of training and background, and yet here we are at this time, at the beginning of what I think of as the spiritual revolution on our planet, arriving at the same place from totally different backgrounds. And it's such an exciting and exquisite kind of notion to realize that it really has nothing to do with where you were born or what your physiology is or what your background is or what your physical capacities are or your intellectual capacities. It has nothing to do with that. That there is an intelligence that is within you, a universal intelligence, and that universal intelligence doesn't need to be named. You can't name it. You can't put a label on it. The great Danish theologian Kierkegaard said that once you label me, you negate me. I can no longer be who I really am. I must now live up to some label that you have placed on me. And that you can look at something as beautiful as a flower, which is a complete and total mystery. You spend time with spiritually enlightened people, and they can do a dialogue with this flower. It's almost like the difference between an optimist and a pessimist. You know, they say the same things, they just word them a little differently. You know, the optimist gets up and looks in the morning and says, "Good morning, God." You know, the optimist looks out, or the pessimist looks out and says, "Good God, it's morning." You know, it's like same words, just a little different flavor. Here you are with something that if I gave you an assignment to make, none of you could go out and make it. Not a person in this world can create a chrysanthemum. It's a mystery, a total mystery. You need some of this to make more of them. There's an intelligence about this flower. And what you call it is not what it is. That intelligence suffuses it, surrounds it, permeates it, is inside it, about it, however you want to phrase it. It is something that is invisible, that you can't get a hold of, and that without it, it doesn't exist. And that intelligence is something that I have been studying and examining and looking at. And dramatic changes have been taking place in my life. You've probably seen them. Those of you who have read my books, who know of my writing from back in the 70s when I wrote Erroneous Zones and Pulling Your Own Strings, and those books that really catapulted me into the public limelight. And I didn't really ask for that. I didn't even seek it out. It just was sort of something that came along, something that showed up. And people ask me over and over again, why now? Why is the tone of your talks, and why is the tone of your books, why is you see it when you believe it such a, it's almost got a spiritual nature to it. What is it about that? And where did that come from? Well, I wrote a book years ago, almost a decade ago, called Gifts from Icus. And in that book, it's a parable, and it's a book that I've sent out to thousands of people all around the planet, that people that write to me and leaders and so on. It's a very simple thing. It was just a little parable that I decided to write as another way of expressing these ideas that I'm sharing here with you this afternoon. And the whole basis of it is very simple. A person lives on this planet, goes to another planet. That planet is Uranus. Uranus is a place where there's an exact duplicate of Earth. This earthling meets this woman on Uranus who is exactly the same as Earth. Everything is the same. The only difference he notices is that the people there are neurotic, just like they are here, but there they have to be. Anxiety really attacks. They have anxiety attacks, but it comes in over the mountains and it attacks. And if you're feeling guilty about something on Uranus, you can go into rewind and you can do it over again. And then there's a reason for that guilt. As soon as you launch yourself into the guilt mode, you get to redo what you did and relive it, and all of it makes great sense. But here, Icus is persuaded to come to this planet, and she cannot figure out where she comes from, where people are neurotic because they have to be. Why in the world all of us are neurotic by choice? Why would we choose that? She just doesn't get that, and wanders all over the planet in just total disarray because she can't figure out why we're all choosing to live these self-defeating lives. And then goes back to her planet of Uranus and gives us the great secrets of the universe. Well, originally, See, publishers don't have a great sense of humor. Originally, my title for this book, Honest, was If You Want to Be Happy, Get Your Head Out of Uranus, which I thought was I just thought that was a great title. I had a great idea for the cover. I was talking to Deepak about, now he's very technical. He uses all these scientific terms. He said that's called anal cerebral inversion, all right? But at any rate, we ended up calling it Gifts from Icus, and we're now working on some things to make it into a movie and things like that. Well, I happened to send this book to a woman in Maryland who was a professor at a university. She was on a mailing list, and I just sent it out because when you find yourself, you see, you get to a point in your life, and this is really what I want to share with you here this afternoon, is when you surrender. You literally surrender. You stop the agonizing and the fighting and the struggling and all of the wondering about what you're here for and what it's all about, and you find yourself like there's a gate down here at the end of the stage, and you find yourself sort of on this path, and as you go along, as you travel along this path, you find yourself undergoing these shifts in your consciousness, and it's almost as if you're watching them take place without you even knowing why they're taking place. It's at that point that you come into contact with the idea that there's something more to who you are than just this physical form that you showed up in. And that is, I think of our physical bodies as a parenthesis in eternity. It opens at your conception, it closes at your death, and it's surrounded by eternity. And so you, in the moment of your conception, everything that you needed for this form that you're going to occupy for the time that you have here on this planet at this time is all handled for you in one deliciously, deliriously perfect, exquisite moment which nobody on the planet understands. It's a complete mystery what life is, where it was before, where it goes afterwards, how does it work, like we have sort of a technology of higher consciousness, but in terms of understanding what it means, what life really means, it's just this mystery. So you get to a point where you surrender, where you're struggling and all of this, and you find yourself in relationships, as Shakti was talking about so beautifully, and then you find that it's not necessary any longer to prove yourself right or wrong with the person you're in a relationship with, and that there are going to be people who are not only not on the path that are going to be in your life, but they're not even on an entrance ramp, okay? I mean, they're not, they're just not getting there, and you know that. They're not even in the lane to get over to the entrance ramp. You know that. And they're not going to be in this lifetime, because there are some people that live 90 years, and there are a lot of people who live 1 year 90 times, aren't there? And it's over and over again, the same kinds of thing. And you find yourself, as you proceed along this path, heading towards this gate, that undergoing these changes and not really quite understanding them. And this was happening to me. My writing was beginning to take on a shift away from how-to and away from psychology and away from teaching people about self-development and how to manage their own emotions and how not to be victimized and even how to live the self-actualized life and how to raise our kids and all of these kinds of things, which are all are works that of which I'm enormously proud. But I found myself not just shifting in my writing, because my writing is always a reflection of that invisible part of who I am. Just like that invisible intelligence that suffuses this chrysanthemum is in there, that same intelligence suffuses me. And I can't name it. So it doesn't matter what you call it. And so often on our planet, we get ourselves consumed and are willing to fight wars over what it is that we call things. Some call it God, some call it spirit, some call it soul, some call it consciousness. You can call it Louise if you want. It doesn't make any difference what you call it. It isn't what you call it. It is something else. It's like you can't drink the word water. You can't float a ship in the formula H2O. You can't do it. There's only one way to know water. And we have 1,110 names for this stuff on our planet. 1,100 names. Some call it aqua, some call it vaser, in Farsi it's called Aap. That's free. No extra charge for that. Aap. But the only way to know it, that's water. And all the descriptors that you can have of it don't mean a thing. You can't get to know it through words. And the same thing is true of this invisible intelligence that suffuses your form. That you show up in this perfectly synchronized, exquisite form of yours. And boy, it was amazing. I was talking to one of the astronauts, Edgar Mitchell, who was one of the people who circumnavigated the moon while his colleagues were down there exploring it back in 1971. And he said he was out there and he looked to his right and he saw this infinity of stars and celestial bodies. Just an infinity, an endless number of them that went to who knows where. And he looked to his left and he could see this blue dot, this bright blue dot, which was Earth. And all of the problems and all the stuff was all incorporated in this perfect little blue dot. And he said he had this thing came over him. It was like a peak experience, a magical moment. And in that magical moment, he realized that this is an intelligent system that we are all a part of. That there's nothing accidental about it. And he came down from that orbit, came back to Earth, and quit the space program, and went out and talked about those concepts, and has been doing it for 20 years. It totally transformed his life. And he said it was an awareness of the intelligence that this system is and that I am a part of that made me transform my life. It's like you get that awareness. And how it happens is not really the issue. The fact that it is something that is a part of your life, it is what has attracted you here today. And I can't explain it. This woman in Maryland that I sent the book to was a scholar who was an expert on Russian literature. And I didn't know who I was sending the book to. And she wrote me back a letter, and she was doing a history of Leo Tolstoy, who was, at the time of his death, in the last 2 years of his life, 1908 and 1909, he was the most famous man on the planet. This was a man who I adored. He had 13 children. I mean, I'm a piker compared to this guy. But he was a man who started out writing very much like I did. He was writing about things and writing stories. And then he progressed into some of his great novels that we know. And then in the last 20 years of his life or so, his writing took on a whole new flavor. And it was something that he didn't even feel he had control over. And suddenly he was writing about God and giving advice about becoming more spiritual beings, and he didn't even know what was happening to him. And Tolstoy was a man who everywhere he went the last 2 or 3 years of his life, he had a horde of reporters following him, writing down everything that he had to say. That's how revered this man was all over the planet. And she sent me, she said, I have read Icus, and I've read You'll See It When You Believe It. And she said, your things are happening to you, I can sense it, and you don't even know it. And I started one of those shaky things, because she was hitting me, right where I live, because it was true. And she said, I was in Moscow last summer, and I was going through the archives, and I came across the original, in Tolstoy's handwriting, his first draft of his will, written in 1885, in his own handwriting, never before published. And this is what he said, and it was so applicable to what is going on in my world today. He said, "Furthermore, and in particular, I ask all people near and far not to praise me. I know they will do so because they have done so in my own lifetime in the most unseemly ways. But if they want to study my writings, let them look carefully at those passages in them in which I know the power of God spoke through me, and make use of them for their own lives. There have been times when I felt I was becoming the bearer of God's will. I have often been so impure, so full of personal passions that the light of this truth has sometimes been obscured by my own darkness. But nevertheless, this truth has sometimes passed through me, and these have been the happiest moments of my life. God grant that these truths should not have been defiled in passing through me, and that people might feed on them despite the superficial and impure form which I have given them." Leo Tolstoy. And after reading that, I went to my car when I got home, and on the seat of my car, so help me, on the seat of my car was a little pink card that somebody, how they had gotten it on there, I don't know, because the car was locked. And sitting on the seat of my car was this little card with a quotation that said, "I have been all things unholy. If God can work through me, he can work through anyone." And it was a quote from St. Francis of Assisi. And what I'm saying to you is that there are stages that we go through in our lives to get to the place of consciousness in which we can truly manifest miracles. I have been working for the last 6 months or the last year on a book that came from the biography of Harry Houdini, the great illusionist of the 1920s, who said that as he got along in his years, he, first of all, when he practiced magic, he had to use deception and chicanery and smoke and mirrors in order to trick the audience into believing this trick that he was performing on stage. He said, but as he got along and got really good at it and began to believe in himself and began to know and surrender to this invisible place within us, that he didn't have to resort to deception any longer. And there was an area of our lives that was unexplored that he called real magic, which sounds like a paradox, doesn't it? If it's real, it can't be magic. If it's magic, it can't be real. And I thought, what a great title. And I was meditating on that, and it is going to be what I'm going to call my next book, Real Magic, Manifesting Miracles in Your Lives. See, I am now at a place in my life where I know, I don't believe it, I don't think it, I know it, that whatever it is that would constitute a miracle for you that has ever been achieved by any other human being, and even if it hasn't, you are capable of manifesting in the material world that you find yourself. Whatever it is that you think of that would constitute miraculousness in your relationships, in your financial world, in your physical world, in your health, in anything that would fit that category of miracle. You have the capacity to create it. Now, once you know that, you begin to discover that there is an alignment that you have to make in your life. You see, there's two parts to being human. There's this form that we find ourselves in that was all handled in that split second. Like all of these hairs that are falling out was all handled in that second. That has not, it's like I held one up on the pillow the other morning to my wife. And this is not a new experience, all right? This has happened several thousand times. I said, honey, $1 million if you can answer this question. She said, what? I said, what held it in yesterday? Something did. It's like you get to this point in your life where you watch your form and you watch it on its way to closing parentheses. And it's like you get in back of it or in front of it or underneath it or around it or somewhere, and you sort of just watch it. And another wrinkle will appear, and another drooping will take place that you didn't want. My wife, who's in the audience today, who really deserves to be recognized, the mother of 7 children. Where are you, honey? Where are you? There she is. I got this. She came up with the greatest, because I always talk about where you are not your form. You're something other than your form. You have to be careful when you use this on your children. I used this on my 6-year-old daughter, Summer, and she was smart-mouthing one day and just talking a little bit fast, like 6-year-olds are prone to do. And I said, Summer, you don't talk like that to your mother. She said, that wasn't me. She had been at my talk the night before. I said, what do you mean it wasn't you? She said, that was my mouth, and I'm not my mouth. So you have to be careful. But my wife, God love her, gave the greatest line ever, because she, at 10 minutes before midnight in 1989, just as we were entering the 90s, she looked at me and she said, you know, in 10 minutes it'll be 1990. I said, yeah. She said, you realize that for this entire decade, I was either pregnant or nursing every day? For an entire decade? She said, I know you told me that I'm not my form, that I'm something invisible, but I just want you to know what has happened to my form in that decade. I said, what are you talking about? She said, well, in one decade, my form has gone from a 36C to a 32 long, and I didn't have anything to do with it. She said, don't you remember I used to nurse Sky up here? Then I had a pillow for Summer, and then Serena came along, and I got rid of the pillow. And then Sands came along, and I just sort of went, and then Sage came along, and I said, here, you want a drink? Help yourself, you know. So, you don't remember all of that? I said, yeah, you're right. It's a good point. You got to have a sense of humor about all of this stuff, you know. But what happens is that you get to this point in your life where you literally are capable of getting outside of this form that you occupy and coming in contact with another dimension of yourself that you can't describe with words any more than you can describe the experience of water with formulas. You must know it and go within and honor it and get it. And as you do that, it comes about from this surrendering process, from this knowing and this realignment. See, if you align yourself first with the physical side, and then primarily physical and secondarily the spiritual side, then your physical world is directing, if you will, the spiritual part of your life. The thoughts, the images, the feelings, all of this part of you that is invisible come from this the physical side of you. What it takes in order to experience real magic is to realign and to align yourself first spiritually. And allow your physiology then to flow from that. It's almost like you have to get outside of your body, watch it do what it has to do, allow it to go through whatever motions it has to go through, but align yourself first and foremost with this invisible part of you. Now, most people don't get this. They don't ever get in their life that this invisible part, this thing that you can call thought or consciousness or soul or whatever it is something that is real. Because it doesn't have boundaries and dimensions like the physical world, we sort of put it aside and give it a couple of hours on Sunday morning. And then when that's over, we charge out of the church lot and don't even let our neighbors in very often on our way home. But it really, what it takes is this realignment. It happened for me when my grandmother died in 1983 on April the 15th, when she was admitted to the hospital, and they weighed her in her 95th year, and she knew that she was dying, and they weighed her, and she weighed 133 pounds because it was one of the things that they had to do to fill out all of the forms for the left-brained attendants who run hospitals. Even more important is, what insurance card do you have? And what was interesting, then my grandmother died. And there was this package, this container, if you will. It wasn't my grandmother. It was cold and getting stiff and blue, and my grandmother was this beautiful soul who raised 5 children, who was such a lively, delightful person. And when my mother was struggling in the early days of her life, when she had 3 boys, when I was the last of those 3, my grandmother was there to help out and take one of those boys in, and had one of her boys, her own, was a prisoner of war in a Nazi concentration camp. She didn't even know if he was alive or dead for a couple of years. And she was that person who always was there to iron clothes or to feed or to find the food for whoever needed it. She was a delightful, beautiful soul. And that's who she was. And she certainly wasn't this container. And when they weighed this container for the death certificate, it weighed 133 pounds. And there was such a powerful metaphor in that. That when life passes from your body, as it will, it won't weigh any less as a result. So that whatever it is that constitutes your life is weightless. You can't get a hold of your life and apply the same rules that you apply to the physicalness that houses your body. You can't do that. You have to know that your life is invisible. It weighs nothing, and yet you can never escape it. In writing, you'll see it when you believe it. I always come up with a display quote. My display quote for this book was written in a letter by John Quincy Adams 3 days before his death. John Quincy Adams was a very spiritual man, the most spiritual who ever sat in the White House, a man who railed against Jefferson and Washington and Madison, who wrote words like "all men are created equal," and went home to their slaves at Mount Vernon and Monticello, and he told them, you can't be authentic and behave in those ways. You have to walk the talk. He knew something that very few people knew at that time, particularly politicians. He even chastised his own father for those kinds of values. And this was 40 years before the Civil War. And 3 days before his death, in one of his last letters, he wrote these words. He said, using a house as a metaphor for his body, "John Quincy Adams is well, but the house in which he lives at the present time is becoming dilapidated. It's tottering on its foundations. Time and the seasons have nearly destroyed it. Its roof is pretty well worn out. Its walls are much shattered and tremble with every wind. I think John Quincy Adams will have to move out of it soon. But he himself is quite well. Quite well, thank you. Now, when you get that, you will have an understanding of what I'm just sort of scratching at here in the hour that I have with you. That you are not a human being having a spiritual experience at all, but that you're a spiritual being having a human experience. And the quality of that human experience is totally and completely and irrevocably tied to how you use that invisible part of your humanity. I said that we go through stages as we move towards awareness or awakening. At the bottom stage is what I call the enlightenment through suffering. And this is when things are happening to you, break up in a relationship, you're struggling, you might have a problem with a disease, someone might die, things go wrong, you get an audit, whatever it is that creates problems for you. And you're asking the question, why is this happening to me, God? And then you go through 5 years or 10 years and you look back on it and you realize exactly that you had to go through that, and you created those characters that were in your life at that time, because just like when you go to sleep at night and have a dream, and all of the characters that you have in the dream are what you need for the dream. And who creates it? But you. And if you need someone to be chasing you, and if you need someone to be miserable, and if you need someone to get mad, then you create all of those characters. But when you wake up, you don't look back and say, where was the gold I had in my dream, and where was my Maserati that I had? Because we all know that it's neurotic, no, it's psychotic to be attached to an illusion, don't we? We know that. And what is this but another 90-year or 100-year dream that we have? And what you have to learn to do is die while you're alive, if you will. That is, experience awakening from this dream, looking back on it and realizing you can't own anything, and that everything that you needed, you created, and you had to have it. And no matter how you judge it and how bad it may be and how much you convince yourself that other people are the ones who shouldn't have behaved the way they did, the fact is that they did. And you have something grand and glorious to learn from it. And then you get to the next stage of enlightenment, which is the stage of enlightenment through outcome, wherein at this time you know that there's a reason for things, and you know that while things are happening to you, there might be a reason for it, and you're asking yourself the question, what's in this for me? So instead of having your mind focused on how terrible it is and how awful it is focused on, there's a lesson here. I'm going to see if I can get that. In sales and in marketing and things like that, this is the time in your life when you're focused on your goals out there, and a lot of people will talk to you about those goals. And you set these goals and you struggle and you work for them and you get here, and this is the external orientation time of your life. The way of thinking in which other people's opinions and what I can get and what commissions I'm going to get and what quotas I'm going to get and what outcomes I'm going to have. And even in my relationships, you're asking, what's in this for me? What can I get out of it? And that's a stage that's a lot better than suffering, but it pales to the highest level, the place that we look to get to. And that is the level of enlightenment by discovering our purpose, by knowing that there are no accidents, that this indeed is a perfect universe, that we are all made up of subatomic particles, and those particles, as Deepak, I'm sure, talked about this morning, are all on purpose and all connected. And they don't behave at all like particles, not in cause and effect manner at all, but in fact, they're all connected. And you begin to discover that all of us are connected, that every human being you run into in your lifetime is someone that you share humanity with. And you begin to realize that that connection is invisible. The poets describe it so well. Yeats, in Sailing to Byzantium in 1928, wrote these words: "An aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick, unless soul clap its hands and sing, and louder sing, for every tatter in its mortal dressed. Isn't that beautiful? An aged man is but a paltry thing. What we are is a tattered coat upon a stick. Unless soul, spirit, consciousness, mind, invisible intelligence, whatever you want to call that part of you that you can't define with boundaries and limits, clap its hands and sing, and louder sing, for every tatter, all of us, in its mortal dressed. We're just dressed in mortal tatters. And once you get that, you begin to realize that there is a purpose for you being here. If you believe in the concept of eternity, that is, no beginnings, no ends, dimensionless, formless eternity, if you believe somehow in your mind in that concept, then you know that there was an instant before you were conceived in which you went from formlessness to form. Somehow, in some way, you came into the material world. Whether it's a mystery to you, whether you think you chose it or God did it for you, how it happened, however you choose to process that, it doesn't make any difference. You know that there was an instant before your conception in which you went from formlessness to form, and then you get this parenthesis in eternity, and then you go back to non-form, whatever that may mean. And the question to be asking isn't, how did it happen and who did it to me? But why in the world would I go from that blissful, perfect, dimensionless, no limit dimension to this? Why would I do that? Or why would God do it to me? Or why would Louise do it? Or whatever it is that you want to call it. And when you can answer that question, if you can't answer that question, this is why I'm closing today, to leave that with you. That question to me is so simple. If you understand that you can't own anything, you can't get anything, you can't have anything, that you just get a parenthesis in eternity and then it's gone. It's an instant, that the jewelry that adorns you will adorn another in a metaphysical instant, that the house that you think is yours will house another just like that in an instant. And you can't have anything, and from the perspective of dying and looking back, it's like waking from the dream. You can't be attached to all of that stuff that was back there because it's now back in pure thought, as is everything, if you learned what Deepak had to say this morning. It is all thought. The whole universe comes out of that consciousness of thought. Everything that's ever happened to you up until this moment, in this moment, which is all you get, is a thought. Everything that's ever going to happen to you from this moment on is a thought in this moment. Every relationship that you have with everyone in your life is a thought. You can't get behind someone else's eyeballs and be them. The only thing you can do is experience them with your mind. And if in your mind you understand that what you think about is what expands, or as it says in Proverbs, as you think, so shall you be. If you know that, then what you're processing in your relationships is what's wrong with that person or what you don't like. Then what you don't like and what's wrong will expand. It has to. If you process that person in terms of what I love about them, then that will expand for you. So that person is just a thought to you. And how you relate to them is exquisitely and perfectly in thought. If you think that you're going to get worse, if you think if you have a sniffle on Monday morning, but tomorrow it'll be in your throat, and on Wednesday it'll be in your chest, and on Thursday you'll have a fever, and on Friday you're going to have to take the day off because it always happens that way, and it's still Monday morning, then you're going to create that. Now, if you know that what you think about expands, then you want to be very careful about what you think about. You don't want to be thinking about scarcity or what's wrong or what you don't like unless you want that to expand. And people who are enormously successful have what I call an abundance philosophy, not a scarcity consciousness. People who have a scarcity consciousness believe in scarcity. They defend it, they argue for it, and they tell everybody else that that's what's going to happen, and sure enough, that's what they create. Your purpose as a human being for being here, since you can't have anything, you can't take a thing with you out of the dream, it all just evaporates back into that amorphous, dimensionless place, it's not even a place, called thought or consciousness or Louise. Then the only thing that you can do, you show up with this naked little body, it goes through its wrinkling process, and then you leave in this wrinkled naked body. If you can't get anything or own anything or be attached to anything, then the only thing you can do is give it away. If you can't get anything, you have to give. When you get that your purpose is about giving and loving and serving, and understanding that, and that whatever it is that you're doing, if you're in sales, if you're focused on how can I help the quotas and meet the quotas of the people that I'm serving instead of what's in it for me, outcome, if you can, in your relationships, give yourself to that other person, if you can find yourself in a position of being able to serve, that is all you can do with your humanity. The measure of the effectiveness of your life is not going to be in what you accumulated. It's going to be in what you were able to give. If you get on giving, your life is working at all levels. When you are inspired, your life works in all areas and in all levels. When you're not inspired, your life isn't working in any level. And when you get to that place where you go within and discover that, then you start taking care of your body in ways that you never did before. Or as the Sufis say, if you don't have a temple in your heart, you'll never find your heart in a temple. It's really about going within, discovering this invisible dimension of yourself through meditation. I don't know how else to do it. And then surrendering, and then knowing and asking the question, how may I serve? And as long as you're about that, then you'll understand what Thoreau talked about when he went to Walden in his great definition of success. If you advance confidently in the direction of your own dreams, thoughts, and endeavor to live the life which you have imagined, thought, you will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. All that you sought and wanted before you got on the path and before you went through that gate will start arriving in your life, and you know what? You won't want it any longer, and you'll give it away. And the more of it that you'll give away, the more of it will keep coming back into you. And the more you hoard it and think, I can get a hold of this is mine, it's like trying to get a hold of a fistful of water. The tighter you grab, the less you get. But when you relax and put your hand in it, you can experience it all you want. It's about giving, serving, and loving. The scientists have such great difficulty in explaining this. But those poets can always do it best. Robert Frost said it this way: we all sit around in a ring and suppose, while the secret sits in the center and knows. What do you suppose the secret that sits in the center is? It's invisible. What you look at a vase and ask yourself, what makes a vase a vase? It's not the material. You hit the vase with a hammer and it's still material still there, you have no vase. What you need in order to have a vase is silent, empty, invisible space inside, surrounded by form. What makes this room a room? Not the material, not the walls, not the ceiling. The silent, empty, invisible space in here allows this room to be a room. Without it, we can't have a room, even though we can't get a hold of it and see it. In Zen, they say it's the space between the bars that holds the tiger. And it's the silence between the notes that makes the music. Not the note, but the silence between. And that's who you are. Silent, empty, invisible, exquisitely perfect, silent, empty space, surrounded by form temporarily. Make contact with that. Go in there and know that you're never alone, that you have loving guidance available in there, that there's a higher place in there for you, and surrender to it. Trust it. Just give it a shot. And you'll discover the great secret that Icus gave as she was going back after visiting our planet for a short time. That there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. Think on it. And God bless you.
If this video helped you out in any way, please make sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification button so you can check out more videos just like these.